Okay, looking at this text, The Alchemist, we can see what the leader of the caravan says to the shepherd, Santiago, as they're making their way through the desert to the oasis. It says, when I'm eating, that's all I think about. If I'm on the march, I just concentrate on marching. If I have to fight, it will be just as good a day to die as any other. Now, here, what I argue is that there are themes of existentialism that we could get from the stranger present in The Alchemist. Basically, there's the idea that, according to the existential diagnosis, that we lose everything, we suffer, and then we die. And that the therapy to this condition is to live in the now, to live in the present moment. And that's what the leader of the caravan through the desert is advocating. He goes on to say to Santiago, I'm interested only in the present. So we can see that I'm not sure whether or not the author of The Alchemist read The Stranger by Albert Camus, but we can see a certain affinity of ideas between the two works. This focus on living in the present moment and making the most of the present moment is what defines both works to a certain extent. The hills of Andalusia are only 2 hours away, but there was an entire desert between him and the pyramids. Yet the boy felt that there was another way to regard his situation. He was actually 2 hours closer to his treasure. Now, for me, the way to interpret this passage is to look back to Shakespeare's Hamlet, where Hamlet famously says to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, for there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. It's not the circumstance, but the attitude toward the circumstance that makes all the difference in The Alchemist. And this is what Hamlet shows us. So if you take Hamlet, you can better understand what's going on in The Alchemist. And again, it's interesting to see this sort of parallel with existentialism as expressed in The Stranger by Meursault. So here's the parallel that exists between The Alchemist and The Stranger by Camus. If Hemingway was correct when he wrote that man is not made for defeat, then Meursault faces his own end undefeated. As Camus writes, for everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone, I had only to wish there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate. Rather than being defeated by his own execution, Meursault celebrates it. His circumstance doesn't change. What changes is his attitude. All right, this passage from The Alchemist comes at the end of the book when Santiago has returned to Spain and he's found the treasure. He says, you old sorcerer, you knew the whole story. Couldn't you have saved me from that? To which the wind responds, if I had told you, you wouldn't have seen the pyramids. They're beautiful, aren't they? So, in understanding this passage, we might look to a poem written by 20th century Greek poet by the name of Cavafy, who wrote a poem based on the Odyssey he calls Ithaca. And at the end of the poem, he writes the following lines. And if you find her poor, Ithaca won't have fooled you. Wise as you will have become, so full of experience, you'll have understood by then what these ithacas mean. So here's the point. The alchemist couldn't have told Santiago, because if he did, Santiago wouldn't have taken the journey to the pyramids and become rich and experience. That's the whole point. And so at the end of the story, the treasure that he finds back at home is a metaphor for the richness that he's acquired in experience. He had to go on the journey in order to become rich in experience. The treasure itself is just a metaphor of that. All right, today in our analysis of the Alchemist, we're going to look at two passages from the Alchemist and one from Nietzsche. So the shepherd says to the crystal merchant, we have to take advantage when luck is on our side and do as much to help it as it's doing to help us. It's called the principle of favorability, or beginner's luck. And then later on, in contrast, when the shepherd is being attacked by robbers as he's digging for his treasure at the pyramids of Egypt, one of the thieves says to him, I was told that if I dug at the roots of the sycamore, I would find a hidden treasure, but I'm not so stupid as to cross an entire desert just because of a recurrent dream. Now, these two passages are linked by this, what the old king in Spain says is a force that wants you to realize your personal legend. One accepts it, that's the shepherd. One rejects it, that's the thief. Now, we can use Nietzsche to help us understand this. Nietzsche writes, terrible experiences pose the riddle whether the person who has them is not terrible. So, the shepherd realizes his dream. He finds his treasure because he had the courage to pursue his personal legend. In other words, the favorable things that happened to him weren't an accident. And the negative things that happened to the thief aren't an accident either. There are no accidents.